hair. When he put his finger near the corner of her mouth he could feel a tiny pulse. He loved its location. And that faint, uncertain jumping, just under her skin. He would touch it, listening with his eyes, like an expectant father feeling his unborn baby kick inside its mother's womb. He held her as though she was a gift, given to him in love. Something still and small, unbearably precious. But when they made love he was offended by her eyes. They behaved as though they belonged to someone else. Someone watching. Looking out of the window at the sea. At a boat in the river. Or a passerby in the mist in a hat. He was exasperated because he didn't know what that look meant. He put it somewhere between indifference and despair. He didn't know that in some places, like the country that Rahel came from, various kinds of despair competed for primacy. And that personal despair could never be desperate enough. That something happened when personal turmoil dropped by at the wayside shrine of the vast, violent, circling, driving, ridiculous, insane, unfeasible, public turmoil of a nation. That big God howled like a hot wind, and demanded obeisance. Then small God, cozy and contained, private and limited, came away cauterized, laughing numbly at his own temerity. Inured by the confirmation of his own inconsequence, he became resilient and truly indifferent. Nothing mattered much. Nothing much mattered. And the less it mattered, the less it mattered. It was never important enough. Because worse things had happened. In the country that she came from, poised forever between the terror of war and the horror of peace, worse things kept happening. So small God laughed a hollow laugh, and skipped away cheerfully. Like a rich boy in shorts. He whistled, kicked stones. The source of his brittle elation was the relative smallness of his misfortune. He climbed into people's eyes and became an exasperating expression. What Larry McCaslin saw in Rahel's eyes was not despair at all, but a sort of enforced optimism. And a hollow whereas words had been. He couldn't be expected to understand that. That the emptiness in one twin was only a version of the quietness in the other. That the two things fitted together. Like stacked spoons. Like familiar lovers' bodies. After they were divorced, Rahel worked for a few months as a waitress in an Indian restaurant in New York. And then for several years as a night clerk in a bulletproof cabin at a gas station outside Washington, where drunks occasionally vomited into the till, and pimps propositioned her with more lucrative job offers. Twice she saw men being shot through their car windows. And once a man who had been stabbed, ejected from a moving car with a knife in his back. Then baby Kukama wrote to say that Istha had been rear-turned. Rahel gave up her job at the gas station and left America gladly. To return to Imanum. To Istha in the rain. In the old house on the hill, baby Kukama sat at the dining table rubbing the thick, frothy bitterness out of an elderly cucumber. She was wearing a limp-check seersucker nightgown with puffed sleeves and yellow turmeric stains. Under the table she swung her tiny, manicured feet, like a small child on a high chair. They were puffy with edema, like little foot-shaped air cushions. In the old days, whenever anybody visited Imanum, baby Kukama made it a point to call attention to their large feet. She would ask to try on their slippers and say, "Look how big for me they are." Then she would walk around the house in them, lifting her sari a little so that everybody could marvel at her tiny feet. She worked on the cucumber with an air of barely concealed triumph. She was delighted that Istha had not spoken to Rahel. That he had looked at her and walked straight past. Into the rain. As he did with everyone else. She was 83. Her eyes spread like butter behind her thick glasses. "I told you, didn't I?" she said to Rahel. "What did you expect? Special treatment? He's lost his mind, I'm telling you. He doesn't recognize people anymore. What did you think?" Rahel said nothing. She could feel the rhythm of Istha's rocking, and the wetness of rain on his skin. She could hear the raucous, scrambled world inside his head. Baby Kakamo looked up at Rahel uneasily. Already she regretted having written to her about Istha's return. But then, what else could she have done? Had him on her hands for the rest of her life? Why should she? He wasn't her responsibility. Or was he? The silence sat between grandniece and baby grandaunt like a third person. A stranger. Swollen. Noxious. Baby Kakama reminded herself to lock her bedroom door at night. She tried to think of something to say. How do you like my bob? With her cucumber hand she touched her new haircut. She left a riveting bitter blob of cucumber froth behind. Rahel could think of nothing to say. She watched baby Kakama peel her cucumber. Yellow slivers of cucumber skin flecked her bosom. Her hair, dyed jet black, was arranged across her scalp like unspooled thread. The dye had stained the skin on her forehead a pale gray, giving her a shadowy second hairline. Rahel started wearing makeup. Lipstick. Kohl. A slight touch of rouge. And because the house was locked and dark, and because she only believed in 40-watt bulbs, her lipstick mouth had shifted slightly off her real mouth. She had lost weight on her face and shoulders, which had turned her from being a round person into a conical person. But sitting at the dining table, with her enormous hips concealed, she managed to look almost fragile. The dim dining room light had rubbed the wrinkles off her face, leaving it looking in a strange, sunken way younger. She was wearing a lot of jewelry. Rahel's dead grandmother's jewelry. All of it. Winking rings. Diamond earrings. Gold bangles and a beautifully crafted flat gold chain that she touched from time to time, reassuring herself that it was there and that it was hers. Like a young bride who couldn't believe her good fortune. She's living her life backwards, Rahel thought. It was a curiously apt observation. Baby Kakama had lived her life backwards. As a young woman she had renounced the material world, and now, as an old one, she seemed to embrace it. She hugged it and it hugged her back. When she was 18, baby Kakama fell in love with a handsome young Irish monk, Father Mulligan, who was in Kerala for a year on deputation from his seminary in Madras. He was studying Hindu scriptures, in order to be able to denounce them intelligently. Every Thursday morning Father Mulligan came to Imanam to visit baby Kochama's father, Reverend E. John Ip, who was a priest of the Marto Ma Church. Reverend Ip was well known in the Christian community as the man who had been blessed personally by the Patriarch of Antioch, the sovereign head of the Syrian Christian Church, an episode that had become a part of Imanam's folklore. In 1876, when baby Kochama's father was 7 years old, his father had taken him to see the Patriarch, who was visiting the Syrian Christians of Kerala. They found themselves right in front of a group of people whom the Patriarch was addressing in the westernmost veranda of the colony house, in Cochin. Seizing his opportunity, his father whispered in his young son's ear and propelled the little fellow forward. The future reverend, skidding on his heels, rigid with fear, applied his terrified lips to the ring on the Patriarch's middle finger, leaving it wet with spit. The Patriarch wiped his ring on his sleeve, and blessed the little boy. Long after he grew up and became a priest, Reverend Ip continued to be known as Punyan Kenjay, Little Blessed One, and people came down the river in boats all the way from Aleppi and Ernakulam, with children to be blessed by him. Though there was a considerable age difference between Father Mulligan and Reverend Ip, and though they belonged to different denominations of the church, whose only common sentiment was their mutual disaffection, both men enjoyed each other's company, and more often than not, Father Mulligan would be invited to stay for lunch. Of the two men, only one recognized the sexual excitement that rose like a tide in the slender girl who hovered around the table long after lunch had been cleared away. At first baby Kakama tried to seduce Father Mulligan with weekly exhibitions of stage charity. Every Thursday morning, just when Father Mulligan was due to arrive, baby Kukama force-bathed a poor village child at the well with hard red soap that hurt its protruding ribs. "Morning, father," baby Kukama would call out when she saw him, with a smile on her lips that completely belied the vice-like grip that she had on the thin child's soap-slippery arm. "Morning to you, baby," Father Mulligan would say, stopping and folding his umbrella. "There's something I wanted to ask you, Father," baby Kukama would say. In 1 Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 23, it says all things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient. Father, how can all things be lawful unto him? I mean, I can understand if some things are lawful unto him, but... Father Mulligan, uttered by the emotion he aroused in the attractive young girl who stood before him with a trembling, kissable mouth and blazing, coal black eyes. For he was young too, and perhaps not wholly unaware that the solemn explanations with which he dispelled her bogus biblical doubts were completely at odds with the thrilling promise he held out in his effulgent emerald eyes. Every Thursday, undaunted by the merciless midday sun, they would stand there by the well. The young girl and the intrepid Jesuit, both quaking with unchristian passion, using the Bible as a ruse to be with each other. Invariably, in the middle of their conversation, the unfortunate soapy child that was being force-bathed would manage to slip away, and Father Mulligan would snap back to his senses and say, "Oops. We'd better catch him before a cold does." Then he would reopen his umbrella and walk away in chocolate robes and comfortable sandals, like a high-stepping camel with an appointment to keep. He had young baby Kochama's aching heart on a leash, bumping behind him, lurching over leaves and small stones. Bruised and almost broken. A whole year of Thursdays went by. Eventually the time came for Father Mulligan to return to Madras. Since charity had not produced any tangible results, the distraught young baby Kukama invested all her hope in faith. Displaying a stubborn single-mindedness, which in a young girl in those days was considered as bad as a physical deformity, hair lip perhaps, or a clubfoot, baby Kukama defied her father's wishes and became a Roman Catholic. With special dispensation from the Vatican, she took her vows and entered a convent in Madras as a trainee novice. She hoped somehow that this would provide her with legitimate occasion to be with Father Mulligan. She pictured them together, in dark sepulchral rooms with heavy velvet drapes, discussing theology. That was all she wanted. All she ever dared to hope for. Just to be near him. Close enough to smell his beard. To see the coarse weave of his cassock. To love him just by looking at him. Very quickly she realized the futility of this endeavor. She found that the senior sisters monopolized the priests and bishops with biblical doubts more sophisticated than hers would ever be, and that it might be years before she got anywhere near Father Mulligan. She grew restless and unhappy in the convent. She developed a stubborn allergic rash on her scalp from the constant chafing of her wimple. She felt she spoke much better English than everybody else. This made her lonelier than ever. Within a year of her joining the convent, her father began to receive puzzling letters from her in the mail. "My dearest Papa, I am well and happy in the service of Our Lady. But Koh Inor appears to be unhappy and homesick. My dearest Papa, today Koh Inor vomited after lunch and is running a temperature. My dearest Papa, convent food does not seem to suit Koh Inor, though I like it well enough. My dearest Papa, Koh Inor is upset because her family seems to neither understand nor care about her well-being. Other than the fact that it was, at the time, the name of the world's biggest diamond, Reverend E. John Ib knew of no other Koh Inor. He wondered how a girl with a Muslim name had ended up in a Catholic convent. It was baby Kochama's mother who eventually realized that Koh Inor was none other than baby Kokama herself. She remembered that long ago she had shown baby Kokama a copy of her father's, baby Kochama's grandfather's will, in which, describing his grandchildren, he had written, "I have 7 jewels, one of which is my Koh Inor." He went on to bequeath little bits of money and jewelry to each of them, never clarifying which one he considered his Kohinor. Baby Kochama's mother realized that baby Kokama, for no reason that she could think of, had assumed that he had meant her, and all those years later at the convent, knowing that all her letters were read by the Mother Superior before they were posted, had resurrected Kohinor to communicate her troubles to her family. Reverend Ip went to Madras and withdrew his daughter from the convent. She was glad to leave, but insisted that she would not reconvert, and for the rest of her days remained a Roman Catholic. Reverend Ip realized that his daughter had by now developed a reputation and was unlikely to find a husband. He decided that since she couldn't have a husband, there was no harm in her having an education. So he made arrangements for her to attend a course of study at the University of Rochester in America. 2 years later, baby Kokama returned from Rochester with a diploma in ornamental gardening, but more in love with Father Mulligan than ever. There was no trace of the slim, attractive girl that she had been. In her years at Rochester, baby Kokama had grown extremely large. In fact, let it be said, obese. Even timid little Shalap Taylor at Chungam Bridge insisted on charging bush shirt rates for her sari blouses. To keep her from brooding, her father gave baby Kokama charge of the front garden of the Imanam house, where she raised a fierce, bitter garden that people came all the way from Kottayam to see. It was a circular, sloping patch of ground, with a steep gravel driveway, looping around it. Baby Kokama turned it into a lush maze of dwarf hedges, rocks, and gargoyles. The flower she loved the most was the anthurium. Anthurium andrianum. She had a collection of them, the ruprum, the honeymoon, and a host of Japanese varieties. Their single succulent spathes ranged from shades of mottled black to blood red and glistening orange. Their prominent, stippled spad ices always yellow. In the center of baby Kochama's garden, surrounded by beds of canny and phlox, a marble cherub peed an endless silver arc into a shallow pool in which a single blue lotus bloomed. At each corner of the pool lolled a pink plaster of Paris gnome with rosy cheeks and a peaked red cap. Baby Kokama spent her afternoons in her garden. In sari and gum boots. She wielded an enormous pair of head shears in her bright orange gardening gloves. Like a lion tamer, she tamed twisting vines and nurtured bristling cacti. She limited bonsai plants and pampered rare orchids. She waged war on the weather. She tried to grow Edelweiss and Chinese guava. Every night she creamed her feet with real cream and pushed back the cuticles on her toenails. Recently, after enduring more than half a century of relentless, pernickety attention, the ornamental garden had been abandoned. Left to its own devices, it had grown knotted and wild, like a circus whose animals had forgotten their tricks. The weed that people call communist pacha, because it flourished in Kerala like communism, smothered the more exotic plants. Only the vines kept growing, like toenails on a corpse. They reached through the nostrils of the pink plaster gnomes and blossomed in their hollow heads, giving them an expression half surprised, half sneeze coming. The reason for this sudden, unceremonious dumping was a new love. Baby installed a dish antenna on the roof of the Imanam house. She presided over the world in her drawing room on satellite TV. The impossible excitement that this engendered in baby Kokama wasn't hard to understand. It wasn't something that happened gradually. It happened overnight. Blondes, wars, famines, football, sex, music, coups d'état, they all arrived on the same train. They unpacked together. They stayed at the same hotel. And in Imanam, where once the loudest sound had been a musical bus horn, now whole wars, famines, picturesque massacres, and Bill Clinton could be summoned up like servants. And so, while her ornamental garden wilted and died, baby Kokama followed American NBA League games, one-day cricket, and all the Grand Slam tennis tournaments. On weekdays she watched The Bold and the Beautiful and Santa Barbara, where brittle blondes with lipstick and hairstyles rigid with spray seduced androids and defended their sexual empires. Baby Kokama loved their shiny clothes and the smart, bitchy repartee. During the day, disconnected snatches of it came back to her and made her chuckle. Coach Maria, the cook, still wore the thick gold earrings that had disfigured her earlobes forever. She enjoyed the WWF Wrestling Mania shows, where Hulk Hogan and Mr. Perfect, whose necks were wider than their heads, wore spangled lycra leggings and beat each other up brutally. Coach Maria's laugh had that slightly cruel ring to it that young children sometimes have. All day they sat in the drawing room, baby Kakama on the long-armed planter's chair or the chaise longue, depending on the condition of her feet, Coach Maria next to her on the floor, channel surfing when she could, locked together in a noisy television silence. One's hair snow white, the other's dyed coal black. They entered all the contests, availed themselves of all the discounts that were advertised and had, on 2 occasions, won a t-shirt and a thermos flask that baby Kakama kept locked away in her cupboard. Baby Kakama loved the Imanum house and cherished the furniture that she had inherited by outliving everybody else. Mamachi's violin and violin stand, the Oadi cupboards, the plastic basket chairs, the deli beds, the dressing table from Vienna with cracked ivory knobs, the rosewood dining table that Vilutha made. She was frightened by the BBC famines and television wars that she encountered while she channel surfed. Her old fears of the revolution and the Marxist-Leninist menace had been rekindled by new television worries about the growing numbers of desperate and dispossessed people. She viewed ethnic cleansing, famine and genocide as direct threats to her furniture. She kept her doors and windows locked, unless she was using them. She used her windows for specific purposes. For a breath of fresh air. To pay for the milk. To let out a trapped wasp, which Coach Maria was made to chase around the house with a towel. She even locked her sad, paint-flaking fridge, where she kept her week's supply of cream buns that Coach Maria brought her from Best Bakery in Kottayam, and the 2 bottles of rice water that she drank instead of ordinary water. On the shelf below the baffle tray, she kept what was left of Mamachi's willow pattern dinner service. She put the dozen or so bottles of insulin that Rahel brought her in the cheese and butter compartment. She suspected that these days, even the innocent and the round-eyed could be crockery crooks, or cream bun cravers, or thieving diabetics cruising Imanum for imported insulin. She didn't even trust the twins. She deemed them capable of anything. Anything at all. They might even steal their present back, she thought, and realized with a pang how quickly she had reverted to thinking of them as though they were a single unit once again. After all those years. Determined not to let the past creep up on her, she altered her thought at once. She might steal her present back. She looked at Rahel standing at the dining table and noticed the same eerie stealth, the ability to keep very still and very quiet that Istha seemed to have mastered. Baby Kakama was a little intimidated by Rahel's quietness. So, she said, her voice shrill, faltering. What are your plans? How long will you be staying? Have you decided? Rahel tried to say something. It came arjated. Like a piece of tin. She walked to the window and opened it. For a breath of fresh air. Shut it when you've finished with it, Baby Kakama said, and closed her face like a cupboard. You couldn't see the river from the window anymore. You could, until Mamachi had had the back veranda closed in with Imanum's first sliding folding door. The oil portraits of Reverend E. Janib and Alioidi Amachi, Istha and Rahel's great-grandparents, were taken down from the back veranda and put up in the front one. They hung there now, the little blessed one and his wife, on either side of the stuffed, mounted bison head. Reverend Ib smiled his confident ancestor smile out across the road instead of the river. Alioidi Amachi looked more hesitant. As though she would have liked to turn around but couldn't. Perhaps it wasn't as easy for her to abandon the river. With her eyes she looked in the direction that her husband looked. With her heart she looked away. Her heavy, dull gold kuniku earrings, tokens of the little blessed one's goodness, had stretched her earlobes and hung all the way down to her shoulders. Through the holes in her ears you could see the hot river and the dark trees that bent into it. And the fishermen in their boats. And the fish. Though you couldn't see the river from the house anymore, like a seashell always has a sea sense, the Imanum house still had a river sense. A rushing, rolling, fish swimming sense. From the dining room window where she stood, with the wind in her hair, Rahel could see the rain drum down on the rusted tin roof of what used to be their grandmother's pickle factory. Paradise Pickles and Preserves. It lay between the house and the river. They used to make pickles, squashes, jams, curry powders, and canned pineapples. And banana jam, illegally, after the FPO, Food Products Organization, banned it because according to their specifications it was neither jam nor jelly. Too thin for jelly and too thick for jam. An ambiguous, unclassifiable consistency, they said. As per their books. Looking back now, to Rahel it seemed as though this difficulty that their family had with classification ran much deeper than the jam-jelly question. Perhaps Amua, Ista, and she were the worst transgressors. But it wasn't just them. It was the others too. They all broke the rules. They all crossed into forbidden territory. They all tampered with the laws that lay down who should be loved and how. And how much. The laws that make grandmothers grandmothers, uncles. Uncles, mothers mothers, cousins cousins, jam jam, and jelly jelly. It was a time when uncles became fathers, mothers lovers, and cousins died and had funerals. It was a time when the unthinkable became thinkable and the impossible really happened.
So this is chapter 1 of Arundhati Roy's book, The God of Small Things. Thank you. We'll posting the next chapter very soon.